With the release of Abdelbaset al-Megrahi still very much in the news, Radio 4 now presents a special feature-length repeat of Lockerbie On Trial, a dramatised reconstruction of the trial of the two men accused of blowing up Pan Am Flight 103 in 1988, first broadcast a fortnight after the trial. Lockerbie On Trial, presented by Sheena MacDonald, is the story of one of the most extraordinary trials in history.
Guilty of the biggest mass murder in British history. 20 years in jail for the Libyan who planted the Lockerbie bomb.
We only have a small measure of justice. What we have here is a foot soldier.
There's no way that McGrahi did this by himself, so...
Libyan leaders need to take every opportunity.
Another Libyan was acquitted, and within the past hour he started his journey home.
It was a trial that for nearly a decade many people believed would never happen. It was one of the most expensive and complex in British legal history. The investigation that preceded it into the murder of 259 passengers and crew of Pan Am 103 and the 11 inhabitants of Lockerbie killed on the ground was the nation's largest murder hunt. The trial lasted 84 days. During that time, a pageant of witnesses passed through the courtroom, ranging from the Scottish police to convicted terrorists, from airport baggage handlers to arms dealers and double agents. This dramatised reconstruction of the events in this extraordinary trial is based on the court transcripts and the accounts of experts and relatives. Terminal 3, Heathrow Airport, 4 days before Christmas 1988. At the desks of Pan American Airlines, the passengers were queuing to join the 1800 hours flight, Pan Am 103, to New York's John F. Kennedy Airport. The majority of the 259 passengers and crew were American. There were the military personnel with their wives and children from US bases in West Germany. There were students from Syracuse University returning home from an overseas program. There were 3 special agents returning from a complex mission in the Middle East. And there were passengers from other nationalities, many British, on family or business trips. The flight was some 25 minutes late. Although one of the busiest flights at the busiest time of the year, the aircraft was only 2/3 full.
Roger.
There'd been a number of last-minute cancellations.
Climb Flight 120.
Flight 103 took off into the dark December night at 18:25, heading northwest to the border country before heading out over the North Atlantic.
Own navigation direct to Pole Hill and contact London on 134.75.
134.75. Good night, sir.
Good night, 103.
"30 minutes later, at 3 minutes past 7, the aircraft had reached its cruising height of 32,000 feet. 6 miles below, the border town of Lockerbie was also settling for the night. Some had started watching This Is Your Life. The big red book was opening for Harry Corbett, creator of Sooty.
Above the town hall, I saw coming down, silhouetted against the clouds, the complete wing shape of an aircraft. There was a kind of a crumpled thump, and then a great ball of flame just rose straight up in the sky.
It looked like an atomic bomb. I mean, it's the only thing that can describe the height of the flames and the swell of the smoke. And we heard things dropping and hitting the ground, but we didn't realise what they were. We heard this awful screaming noise. I mean, no child can scream as high. And then all of a sudden there was a big bang, and I could see something in the field. But when we got into the field there, I just went in. The first thing I seen was a cockpit of the Pan Am, and nobody alive. But it was just eerie.
There was news on the television of a crash, and I looked at my watch and thought about when Flora's plane was due to leave and thought it couldn't be the right one because I didn't know then that it had been delayed a bit. And I think when I came through, the first sight I saw was orange kerosene flames from the aviation fuel spiralling up round a gable end with a chimney, a stone-built gable end with a chimney.
And there were pictures of Lockerbie in flames, and I remember thinking how awful, these poor people. You know, these things always happen to other people, don't they? And then it came up Pan Am Flight 103. And it still didn't click with me, even though I'd checked her bags in. And my wife straight away said, "That's Helga's plane." There was a stunned silence. And then, I know it's etched on my mind, Marcus was saying, "No, no, no, no." And Lisa was saying, "Helga, Helga, Helga."
My lords, I intend at this stage to reach that part of the uncontroversial evidence which lists the names of those who were passengers and crew on Flight Pan Am 103. 1. John Michael Gerard Ahern, 127 Sherman Avenue, Rockville Centre, New York. 2. Sarah Margaret Eicher, 30...
It was on May the 3rd, 2000, that this trial few people thought would ever take place began, at Camp Zeist, a piece of Holland temporarily designated Scottish soil.
267 John Somerville, 15 Sherwood Crescent, Lockerbie, Dumfriesshire. 268 Lindsay Ann Somerville, aged 10 years, 15 Sherwood Crescent, Lockerbie, Dumfriesshire. 269 Paul Somerville, aged 13 years, 15 Sherwood Crescent, Lockerbie, Dumfriesshire. 270 Rosalind Leiter Somerville, 15 Sherwood Crescent, Lockerbie, Dumfriesshire. My lord, at this stage, I would move your lordships to adjourn until Monday morning.
The two accused, Abdelbaset Ali Mohammed al-Megrahi and Amin Khalifa Fhimah, had been in their mid-30s at the time of the bombing. They had been indicted as long ago as 1991, but it took years of sanctions against Libya and an agreement to hold the trial on neutral territory with a panel of 3 judges rather than a jury before they eventually gave themselves up to the Scottish authorities.
Abdelbaset Ali Mohammed al-Megrahi and Amin Khalifa Fhimah did conspire together and with others to further the purposes of the Libyan intelligence services by criminal means, namely the use of explosive devices in the destruction of a civil passenger aircraft and murder of its occupants.
The prosecution had drawn up 3 alternative charges: murder, conspiracy to murder, and contravention of the Air Security Act.
The accused state that they plead not guilty, and further give notice at their trial that they may lead evidence calculated to exculpate themselves, which evidence may tend to incriminate the persons listed in the schedule attached to this notice. And the schedule, my lord, reads as follows. 1. Members of the PPSF, which may include Mohammed Abu Talib, Crown Witness number 96.
The defence, for their part, had taken advantage of Scottish law to launch a special defence, a defence incriminating others as the possible offenders. They believed that there was enough evidence to implicate Palestinian terrorist groups in the bombing conspiracy. During the police investigation, thousands of people had been interviewed. Over 200 would be called as witnesses. The first group, after the eyewitnesses, were from the police. It had been their task to recover the bodies, many badly mutilated. James McLean had been a police inspector involved in both the cleaning up operation and the following investigation. He was examined for the Crown by Alan Turnbull QC.
And how long did it take, Mr. McLean, to recover the bodies in your sector where the fuselage lay?
From the 22nd of December to the 30th. We encountered 1 or 2 difficulties, sir. One of the major ones was that in the aircraft cargo there was 1 million sewing machine needles, and they landed with the fuselage and got everywhere. And so eventually we had to spread a very large tarpaulin right along the site and move forward sort of inch by inch. And that was the reason that the recovery of the bodies in that area took just a wee bit longer than it should have done.
The fuselage is plainly part of the aircraft where the passengers would be seated.
There were still quite a few seated in the fuselage, sir, at that stage, still with their seatbelts on.
I understand, Mr. McLean, that later you assumed other responsibilities.
That's correct, sir. Other sectors were being added all the time, as it was realised how spread out the debris was, and the scale became enormous. I think, at the end of the day, the debris was scattered over 810 square miles.
Even at this early stage in the trial, the defence was interested in probing the activities of the CIA and of the Palestinians mentioned in the special defence. Leading the cross-examination was Richard Keane QC, representing Fhimah.
Mr. McLean, while you were at the Lockerbie site, did you become aware that there were members of other agencies carrying out investigations and recovering material at the site?
Yes, we did discover that very early on, sir.
And those agencies included the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States?
That's correct.
So you were aware that items were being recovered by members of the CIA?
I understand at one point there may have been, sir, yes.
It would be unusual in most criminal inquiries to find foreign intelligence agencies recovering evidence, wouldn't it?
Well, yes, it would be, sir. It wouldn't be allowed, particularly.
Thank you. Now, I gather that in the early part of 1989, you spent some time in Germany at the headquarters of the BKA, the German equivalent of the CID.
That's correct, sir, yes.
For how long had the Scottish police been there when you arrived?
I think they went there as soon as possible after the incident, sir. It was quickly identified that we definitely needed to investigate certain things in Germany.
Were you aware that they were carrying out inquiries into the activities of members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command?
That's correct, sir, yes.
Thank you.
George Joffe, from the Centre for International Studies, explains the Palestinian connection.
One of the things that the PFLP-GC had done at the end of the 1960s and beginning of the 1970s was to become prominent in hijacking aircraft. Now, in 1988, in Germany, the group there appears to have been based there to manufacture bombs, and indeed, we aren't quite certain, to use them in hijacks, in a renewed spate of hijacking. In fact, in the event nothing occurred, the German police arrested the group before anything could occur and caught the two main people inside it. And they also came across a number of bombs that had been manufactured in Toshiba tape recorder cases, and they believe that they therefore completely eliminated the group. In reality, it appears that they may not have done so, and there were suggestions that they'd missed some of the bombs that had been actually manufactured.
In the painstaking searches around Lockerbie and the border country, the police had accumulated a staggering 4 million pieces of debris. Within this mountain of material, a tiny fragment of green circuit board, no larger than a child's fingernail, had been found in the scorched neckband of a grey shirt. Its position, deeply buried in clothing which had obviously been close to the explosion, meant that it just might throw light on the kind of bomb and who had made it. Detective Chief Inspector William Williamson spent months in a fruitless search in this country and in Germany, trying to discover what this tiny fragment might be.
So, having failed to find a lead in Germany, what did you do then?
We went to the circuit board industry, but again we drew a blank.
So what happened next?
Well, in June 1990, we had a surprise phone call from the FBI in Washington saying they had something they wanted to show us. So Mr. Faraday and I went across there, and we were shown the printed circuit board from a timer. We made comparisons, and it was clear that it was identical to the piece we were trying to identify.
So where had the FBI recovered this timer?
It had been recovered from an arms cache found in Togo in Central Africa, and they also had another they recovered in Senegal. This last one had been found in the possession of a Libyan.
And did that lead to the source of the timer?
Not immediately, sir. But there were marks on the circuit board recovered from Togo. On one side was printed the letters MST-13.
And what did you think that signified?
We weren't sure, but we thought it was probably a model number of some sort. On the other side of the board, we could just see another mark. And when we looked closely, we saw what we took to be the letters MEBQ.
The MEBQ deciphered on the circuit board had been rapidly identified as MEBO, or MEBO, an acronym for Meister and Bollier, a Swiss electronics firm. Alan Faraday from the government's Defence Evaluation and Research Agency had coordinated much of the forensic research. His evidence explained how the bomb had been carried in a hard-shell Samsonite suitcase, the only one of its kind on the plane. The bomb had been packed in the case along with an unusual collection of clothes, and it had been concealed in a Toshiba cassette recorder. However, this was a different model from the one used by the Palestinians in Germany, and the MST-13 timer in the bomb was much more sophisticated than the Palestinians. So as the Crown's first star witness, Edwin Bollier, the chief executive of MEBO, came to the stand, it was essential for the Crown to establish a really strong link between him, Libya, and the two accused. After having Bollier admit his association with the Stasi, Alan Turnbull worked through the lengthy history of his dealings with the Libyans. He came eventually to the visit Bollier made to Tripoli on the eve of the Pan Am 103 bombing.
Mr. Bollier, in your dealings with Mr. McGrahi, what position did you understand him to hold?
I don't know. I think he had a fairly high position, but how high, I don't know. I assumed he had some role in the military, that he may be a major, and I had also heard that he was of Gaddafi's family.
But he was involved with the military?
Yes, or at least he ordered for the military.
Can we move on then? Did you receive another order for timers in December of 1988 in the period leading up to the Pan Am 103 incident?
Yes, I was asked by my Libyan contact whether I had 40 timers in stock because they needed them urgently. Well, we had 1 or 2, but no 40, so it wasn't possible to deliver MST-13 timers. We decided to provide them with Olympus timers instead.
Did you tell them that you were going to bring replacement timers?
No, we didn't.
Was there a problem?
Yes. I was told they didn't want these timers. They wanted our MST-13 timers. When I argue, I was told I must go and see McGrahi.
I see. When you arrived at McGrahi's office, what happened?
Well, there was a waiting room, and we sat in the waiting room for about 2 hours, until 8 p.m.
And did anything happen when you were leaving his office?
Well, as we were leaving, there was a door slightly ajar, and I could see that people were seated around the table. Yes, I did see people. It must have been a meeting.
How many people did you see?
Well, about 4 or 5.
All right. Did you recognize any of the people that you saw?
One man might have been Colonel Nasser, but I cannot say for sure. I only saw these people for a very brief moment.
All right. And after leaving McGrahi's office, had you still not been paid for the timers?
No. So, of course, when I left next day, the 20th of December, I took them back with me.
In January 1989, only 4 weeks after the Lockerbie bombing, the CIA had received a mysterious letter. The letter implicated the Libyans in the bombing, at a time when investigations were focused on the Palestinians. This letter had eventually been traced back to none other than Edwin Bollier.
Well, can we look at something that happened shortly after the bombing itself? Perhaps a matter of a week or 2 afterwards. Did you write a letter?
Which letter are you referring to? I wrote one on the 5th of January.
Let's talk about that one. Who did you write it to?
That was written to the CIA.
You tell us then why you wrote this letter to the CIA.
Okay. On the morning of the 30th December 1988, when I arrived to MEBO office, there was a man standing close to the main entrance. He asked me, "Are you Edwin Bollier?" I answered yes, and told him, "Please, come in." After only a few words, I realized that this must be someone from the security services. You can tell immediately when you deal with people from the intelligence service. And he said, "Mr. Bollier, you were in Libya. You delivered 40 MST timers. You returned via Malta to Zurich, and I can tell you that the Libyans are connected with this attack." He gave me very clear instructions. Write the letter to the CIA and send it to the embassy. And explain that Colonel Gaddafi is behind this attack, etc., etc. And all I can say is, do it. Otherwise you will have to suffer the consequences in the media, etc. And then he disappeared the same way he had shown up on the scene. This man obviously had inside knowledge. He said, I had to type this letter on the typewriter with a Spanish letter set. And over the New Year I thought whether I should do it or not. And then I decided I would do it. And I was looking for a typewriter with Spanish letter set in Zurich. This letter is pure fantasy. I put it together on order of this mystery man.
Bollier's evidence had established that he supplied timers to Libya, and McGrahi was involved. But his own bizarre explanation for the letter to the CIA could be covering a multitude of sins, including conspiring with the Stasi. This was to be pursued by Richard Keane in his cross-examination.
Mr. Bollier, you are, I take it, a legitimate Swiss businessman.
That's correct.
And you're a legitimate Swiss businessman who, for the past 30 years, has tried to earn a living from the supply and export of various electrical goods.
That's correct, yes.
Now, earlier you told us that your best customers were Libya, but that they were very slow to pay.
That's correct.
But the relationship with the Stasi was financially very different, wasn't it? Because for most of the time, matters were arranged so that you appeared to be in debt to them. Isn't that so?
In the beginning, yes.
In fact, the Stasi paid you a total of 1.5 million Swiss francs, didn't they, Mr. Bollier?
That would be correct, yes.
I suppose being in debt to a customer like the Stasi might act as something of an incentive to a legitimate Swiss businessman like yourself. Would that be fair?
Well, I'm not sure what you are driving at.
I see. Well, let's just pause, shall we, Mr. Bollier, and consider this mystery man for a moment. The latest version of the mystery man you gave us in court, Mr. Bollier, involved him approaching you near the Mebo offices. Is that right?
He was walking back and forth in the corridor, yes.
Was he wearing a Macintosh by any chance, Mr. Bollier?
Yes, light-coloured Macintosh.
He didn't happen to have a trilby pulled down over his eyes, did he, Mr. Bollier?
No, he didn't.
No trilby. Do you recall hearing zither music when he approached you, Mr. Bollier?
Zither music?
There was no zither music?
No.
Could you see a Ferris wheel in the distance, perhaps?
No.
So it's just a plain, mysterious man in a Mac?
Yes, what you say is correct. Presumably, it was somebody from the intelligence people.
You see, you indulged in this mystery very early in your investigation by the authorities, again to disguise your links with the Stasi, didn't you?
No. I reject that completely. In this Lockerbie matter, there are only very odd things.
In your evidence on the Lockerbie matter, there are only very odd things, Mr. Bollier. Would that be more accurate? But let us move on to the 19th of January, when you went to East Berlin by way of Vienna and you went into the US Embassy there and deposited a letter.
That's correct.
Now, during your examination in chief, you admitted to the Crown that the purpose of this letter was to divert the investigators from the wrong tracks and bring them onto the track of the Libyans. That was your answer.
Yes.
But you had become aware, hadn't you, that the Stasi monitored the telephone traffic of the BKA, the West German Secret Police. Is that correct?
I cannot say whether it's correct. One would assume so.
Well, Mr. Bollier, you say that the letter was not only to implicate the Libyans, but to divert the investigators from the wrong track. And I have to suggest to you that an ordinary legitimate Swiss businessman would not have known by the 19th of January 1989 that the investigators were on the track of any particular party. However, one who was a Stasi collaborator could have been advised by the Stasi that the BKA telephone traffic showed they were on the track of the PFLP General Command, couldn't he? Now, what do you say about that, Mr. Bollier?
I must reject that. What are you telling me is not true. It is not true.
Well, with respect, we know that there was no press report by the 19th of January 1989 which put the investigations on a specific track relating to the PFLP.
Well, nobody had told me anything of the sort. It was this man who showed up on the 30th of December.
Mr. Bollier, let's be straightforward. You were instructed by your masters in East Germany on about the 5th of January 1989 to write a letter implicating the Libyans because they were concerned that the investigators were on different tracks of inquiry with regard to the Pan Am bombing.
This is not correct. On the 5th of January, I was in Zurich.
Well, we'll just check your recollection on that now, I think, Mr. Bollier. I'm going to quote from a statement you gave in front of both CIA officers and those from the Scottish police. Let me read this section. It says, "The idea to send an anonymous letter to the US officials investigating the Pan Am Flight 103 case originated with both Bollier and Meister after a January the 5th, 1989 incident involving Mustafa and a Stasi man in Berlin. So during an interview monitored by a large number of people, you refer to a meeting in East Berlin on January the 5th, 1989. Do you see that?"
Yes, but it might be that there is a transcription mistake here, or that I confused the date, but on January the 5th, I was in...
Mr. Bollier, over the years of association with the Stasi, you provided them with all the relevant materials you developed, such as electronic timers.
That's correct.
The whole purpose of the 20-year relationship.
Yes.
And because, at the beginning of this investigation, you were still a collaborator of the Stasi and indebted to them, you became drawn into a web of cunning and deceit and lies to implicate the Libyans, in which you are still enmeshed. Is that not the case?
No, it is not correct.
Do I take it, Mr. Bollier, that you are just a legitimate Swiss businessman? Is that correct?
That is correct.
I have no further questions, my lord.
Jim Swire.
Many of us came away feeling that this guy should be considered as having played a guilty role if his timer was used in this disaster, and that in itself constitutes guilt, to my mind, because if there were no timers, then it would be more difficult to make time bombs, wouldn't it? That's fairly simplistic.
And Pam Dix, whose brother Peter died in the explosion.
Were it not for morally reprehensible people like him, Lockerbie would never have happened. And while he has not been accused of being a conspirator in the bombing, for me he's the closest thing you have in the courtroom to somebody who did it.
Through all the largely unfavourable reactions to his court appearance, Bollier had established two simple but significant facts. He had supplied timers to the Libyans, and he had regular dealings with McGrahi. Now the Crown's case moved on to another chapter, the Malta connection. The clothing in the suitcase containing the bomb had led the Scottish police to a clothing shop in Malta. Mary's house was owned by the Gauci family, and Tony Gauci had sold the clothes. He was examined by one of the other Crown barristers, Advocate Depute Alistair Campbell, QC.
Mr. Gauci, when the police came to see you at the beginning of September 1989, were you able to remember when this particular sale had taken place?
No, exactly I couldn't remember the date. But it must have been about a fortnight before Christmas, at about 6:30 it was. But I can't remember the date.
And your customer, was that a man or a woman?
A man.
Did you recognize his nationality?
Yes, to me he was a Libyan.
Are you familiar with Libyans?
Many come to Malta and I recognize them.
Did your customer want a particular kind of item, or did it matter to him, or what?
It wasn't important for him what he was buying, it seemed to me. Because when I asked him whether he wanted to try on trousers especially, he said it wasn't for him. That's how I remember him.
And did he buy trousers from you?
Yes, he bought 2 pairs of winter trousers. One was striped and the other, I believe, was check.
Could you look at the document production 424, which is on the screen? Now, we see that it's a delivery note from Yorkie Clothing, dated 18th November 1988, and it's to Messrs. Gauci with an order number 1705. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Could we look now at photograph 107? Now, do you see a number of fragments of burnt cloth from a pair of checked trousers, remnants of a pair believed to be packed in the suitcase bomb?
Yes.
And if we look at photograph 110, do we see on one of these fragments the number 1705?
Yes, exactly.
So do I take it that this fragment, recovered from Pan Am 103 that we are looking at, came from the order of trousers that you took possession of on the 18th of November 1988?
100%.
Now, earlier on, you thought that the date you sold the clothes to the Libyan would be about a fortnight before Christmas.
Something like that, yes. But not exactly.
Do you remember what the weather was like when the man came to the shop?
When he came by the first time, it wasn't raining. But then it started dripping. Not very... It wasn't raining heavily. It was simply dripping. But as a matter of fact, he did buy an umbrella.
We'll come back to talk about the umbrella, but first, did he buy a number of other items of clothing?
Yes, he bought 2 shirts, 2 pairs of pyjamas, a jacket and a baby grow, and 2 cardigans, and an umbrella.
You mentioned the umbrella. Would you look, please, at label 444? Now, how does that umbrella compare with the umbrella that you sold to the Libyan gentleman?
Yes, very similar. We have lots of these.
Yeah. I wonder if I could now ask you about the appearance of the man. What sort of build did he have?
I think he was below 6 foot, but I'm not an expert on these things. He wasn't small. He was a normal stature. He had ordered a 16.5 shirt.
And how old was he?
Under 60, but I don't have experience on height or age.
Very well. What color was his hair?
Black.
Gauci had initially impressed the police because he had volunteered information about the umbrella, without knowing there was one packed in the suitcase bomb. He also impressed in the way that he initially identified McGrahi. For some 18 months, through 1989 and 1990, he had been shown book after book of photographs of possible suspects, but he steadfastly held to his belief that he had not seen a proper likeness of the man to whom he had sold the clothes. But he had been shown a photograph of Abu Talb, one of the alternative suspects listed in the special defence. The photo appeared in a newspaper article shown to Tony Gauci by his brother.
In the newspaper, Mr. Gauci, was there a photograph of a man in an article about the Lockerbie disaster?
Yes.
Could you look, please, at production 1833? Now, we can see a photograph which has the word bomber across it and the name Abu Talb in the caption underneath. Do you see this?
Yes.
Mr. Gauci, what was it about this photograph that made you think that was the man who bought the articles from you?
He resembled... He resembled him, didn't he? His face and his hair was the way it appeared to me.
Now, apart from this incident, at the end of a viewing in September 1990, the police have noted you as saying, "I have been shown many photographs over the last year, but I've never seen a photograph of the man who bought the clothing." Was that the truth?
Yes, at the time.
Now, if we move on now to the beginning of 1991, the police noted you as saying, "I looked at all 12 photographs carefully, and I would say that the photograph number 8 is similar to the man who bought the clothing. He would perhaps have to look about 10 years or more older, and then he would look like the man who bought the clothes." And that was a picture of the first accused, McGrahi, wasn't it?
It was.
So, this was the only photograph really similar to the man who bought the clothing other than the one your brother showed you. Is that the truth?
Exactly.
Thank you, Mr. Gauci.
There were qualifications about Gauci's evidence, but he had identified McGrahi from the first photograph shown to him. He had also failed to recognise 2 other photographs of Abu Talb. It was the clothes that had established the link to Malta and indirectly to the Libyans. Malta was well known as a bridge between North Africa and Europe. One of the reasons Amin Fhimah had come under suspicion was that until just before the bombing, he had been Libyan Arab Airlines station manager at Malta's Lucca airport. The police had also discovered a diary of his for 1988. From this, it was clear that he was working for McGrahi. And there was one heavily incriminating phrase: "Get tags from Air Malta." The inference that he was using his special position in setting the suitcase bomb on its way was there for all to take. Except that Lucca Airport at that time was a small and close community. Wilfred Borg was a ground staff manager with Air Malta in 1988 and was cross-examined by Bill Taylor QC, representing McGrahi.
Now, Mr. Borg, we can see from the photograph that there are several of these glass doors which run along the length of the conveyor belt, taking luggage away from the check-in desks.
Yes, there were 3, and you could look through them to the luggage area from the check-in point and vice versa.
And the possibility, Mr. Borg, of someone illicitly placing a bag somewhere along the length of that conveyor belt while it is in motion and the check-in desks are open is extremely remote.
In my view, yes. The nature and layout of the area makes it very difficult. This area is overlooked by customs and military personnel who are in the baggage area, and it is staffed by check-in agents and by the supervisor. It's a highly conspicuous place.
And the luggage sorting area, the area where the loaders pick up the bags and stack them in the trolleys to take them out to the planes, is only a short distance from where the soldiers operate. Is that correct?
They are next to each other.
So would it be likely that an intruder could put a bag on a trolley in this area?
I would say it is extremely unlikely.
So how was the security system organized airside once the bags were being taken out to the aircraft?
Well, each aircraft had a head loader assigned to it to supervise the operation. Then, once the loading is complete, the ramp dispatcher asks how many bags is loaded.
So he's present, and the head loader, and you have a number of loaders?
Yes. And if the figure shows the loader has loaded too many bags, then there will be a visual check. And, unless the figure is reconciled, the passengers will be requested to come down and identify their bags.
All right. Again, Mr. Borg, what would be the prospect of someone being able to illicitly enter a bag at the loading stage?
I would say it's impossible.
That is all I have. Thank you, Mr. Borg.
Advocate Depute.
I don't mean this in any sense to be a criticism, Mr. Borg, but is it the case that Air Malta are still expecting to be involved in defending a civil litigation for a significant sum of money arising out of these matters?
As far as I'm aware, yes.
And that is a matter of some concern for Air Malta, even to the extent that Air Malta lawyers accompanied you to this court. Is that so?
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
The Crown had an additional witness. 10 years previously, a ticket agent at Lucca Airport, Nicholas Charlo, had given a frank interview to the police, which made it clear just how valuable someone with special access might be. However, after so much time, Mr. Charlo seemed to remember things differently.
Now, Mr. Chiarlo, moving on to the next page of your police interview, you're reported as saying, I have even seen Fhimah putting the security tags on an important person's bags. Then he would walk past the security soldier at the gate near the ladies' toilet, turn right, walk along the corridor, turn right through a door, and straight in behind the check-in desk. He would then put the bag straight onto the conveyor belt. I have actually seen Fhimah and Giaca doing that. I have done it myself only a few times, but I have done it, and I have seen them do it too. Now, Mr. Chiarlo, did I read it accurately?
I said before that I cannot remember using that wording.
But they have accurately recorded a route that existed in Lucca Airport, haven't they?
Well, they knew that before they interviewed me. What I can't understand is that maybe there has been a misunderstanding in the way I explain things.
Yes, well, let's just say the police officers give evidence that they had no difficulty in understanding and then move on, shall we, to the next paragraph. Here you're reported as saying, if you are really friendly with the customs men and you are known at the airport, you would be very rarely searched on arrival. If you are with someone else, a friend perhaps, and you don't want him to be searched, you would just take his baggage from him and carry it through. You wouldn't be searched. We all knew one another and were friends, and that's how it was. Have I accurately read that portion?
I cannot remember the exact wording. But yes, you can help people out.
Thank you, Mr. Chiarlo.
Nicholas Charlo's evidence at least showed that the system at Lucca Airport could be abused. And it was the Crown case that both the accused were at Lucca in December 1988, first bringing in the bomb to Malta, and then placing the bomb on the flight bound for Frankfurt and then London. A further witness was able to account personally for the presence of McGrahi at Lucca Airport on the morning of December the 21st, the day of the bombing. McGrahi was returning to Tripoli, but he was travelling under a false name, Ahmed Abdusamad. Isabel Attard was at the check-in desk that morning.
Miss Attard, can we look at the passenger list for the Libyan Arab Airlines Flight 147 to Tripoli? Do we see that the passenger number 6 had the name Ahmed?
Yes.
Did you check in any other passengers for that Tripoli flight?
Is this list complete? Okay, no, sir.
Is it possible to understand something about the Libyan Airlines flight that morning? Did they tend to be busy?
Yes, it would have been. There would have been a lot of people waiting to be checked in, very impatient, with lots of luggage, everyone handing tickets on top of each other, that kind of thing.
And that morning you had been dealing with the Air Malta flight to Cairo. So what might have led you to checking in one passenger for the Tripoli flight?
Well, if there was a queue, and the passenger had no luggage, or if we didn't want to keep him waiting, it would happen. Then the station manager would ask us to check him in.
And why might the station manager not want to keep someone waiting?
I wouldn't know that.
Well, if we look at the passenger list, there are 6 other passengers with no bags, but you only handled Mr. Ahmed. Does this help to understand which of the 2 alternatives happened here?
It's been a long time. I don't remember.
One last question. I think you knew to some extent one of the accused, Mr. Fhimah.
Yes, I knew Mr. Fhimah and Mr. Giacca.
And do you remember him leaving his job as station manager?
Yes, there was a farewell party, but I never attended.
If Miss Attard knew Fhimah, then why didn't the Crown ask her whether she saw him at the airport that morning? Everyone was left to guess. There was an increasing vulnerability about the Crown's case, which sorely needed a major witness to reinvigorate it. Such a witness was Majid Giacca. Giacca had been a double agent, working both for the Libyan Security Service and the CIA. And he had been working at Lucca Airport as Libyan Arab Airlines assistant station manager. His handler in Malta had regularly sent back cables to Washington reporting on the information Giacca had given him. These cables, the property of the CIA, had been seen by both Crown and Defence in heavily censored form before the trial began. It was these cables that were believed to contain the smoking gun that would certainly pin the case on the 2 accused. But on the return from the summer recess, an extremely angry Bill Taylor reported to the court that he had by chance discovered that the Crown had seen the uncensored cables 3 months previously.
My lord, through the action of the agency of a foreign government, the playing field ceased to be level on the 1st of June. And the Crown did not inform the defence that that was the case. In another jurisdiction, that is called misrepresentation by silence. For nearly 3 months, there's been not a hint that the Crown's knowledge had altered. This is not, as has been inferred by the Crown, a fishing expedition on the off chance of finding something of use to the cross-examiner. This is a request in relation to documents already lodged in this criminal trial. Further, the Crown have indicated that we had adequate opportunity to investigate further in pre-trial interviews. I want to nail that issue very firmly. The witnesses from the foreign agency concerned were interviewed by us in very special circumstances. They were accompanied by a number of U.S. Department of Justice attorneys, instructed by the CIA. The process was characterized by long silences, by invitations to take 5, by which I understand is meant to take a break to enable a prospective witness to consult with the attorney. And back they came with answers such as not relevant, won't answer, refuse to answer. And finally, when questioned about the movement of certain Palestinians in Malta in 1988, the CIA witnesses to these cables pointedly refused to answer, on the grounds that it would not be relevant as the investigation had moved on to Libya from the Palestinians. And yet, my lord, it is as a result of those interviews that I know of material, not obviously its precise content, but material behind those deleted sections which I would require to use in cross-examining Giacca.
The judges accepted the defence argument. It still took another month of wrangling with the CIA before the defence was granted full access. And they were astonished at what they found. At the end of September, Giacca arrived at Camp Zeist via air and motorcade and flanked by no fewer than 30 US Marshals. He was on a witness protection program in the US and believed to be a very much wanted man. As a consequence, a white screen was pulled across the width of the courtroom, blocking Giacca and the rest of the court from the view of the public gallery. Giacca's voice was also heavily disguised as he began being examined by Advocate Depute Alistair Campbell on his links with the accused.
When you joined airline security, who was in charge of the section? Before you left to take up your post in Malta, did you have any conversation with McGrahi about Mr. Fhimah?
I was seeing him about my visa, and in that conversation, he told me to take care of Lamen Fhimah.
So from what was said, you understood him to be friendly with Mr. Fhimah?
Yes, they were friends.
When you established yourself in Malta, was there an office for Libyan Arab Airlines at Lucca Airport?
Yes. It was one we all shared. Fhimah, myself, and another colleague.
Did you share a desk with your colleagues?
Yes.
Did there come a point when you asked Fhimah about the drawer in the desk being locked?
Yes. He told me that he had 10 kilos of TNT that were delivered to him by McGrahi. He opened the drawers, and there were 2 large boxes that they contained these 2 bricks of yellowish crystallized material.
Did the material remain in the drawer for some time after you first saw it?
It stayed there until Fhimah was about to leave. And then I was instructed by McGrahi that I had to take care of this material. So in time, I transferred it to the Libyan consul's office in Malta.
And did you tell the CIA about the explosives in the office drawer?
Yes, I did.
I want now to ask you, Mr. Giacca, about those occasions towards the end of 1988 when you may have seen McGrahi at Lucca Airport. Do you remember an occasion when McGrahi flew in from Tripoli one morning?
Yes. It was a Wednesday morning flight, and when he arrived he had a bag which he took with him to the connecting aircraft. And the bag was carried straight onto the aircraft without going through customs and not stowed in the hold.
And when did this happen?
It was in December 1988, or thereabouts.
Do you also remember another evening when you went to the airport in December of 1988?
Yes. I met Vassallo there. He said he was waiting for Fhimah, who was coming in from Tripoli. And I remember Fahimah's new car was parked in front of the airport.
And what did you do then?
I went to the passport control area for incoming passengers and saw Lamen Fhimah there accompanying McGrahi. And so I saw them at the baggage area, near the carousel.
Which man took the bag off the carousel?
It was Fhimah, I think, who took the suitcase.
What sort of suitcase was it?
It looked like a Samsonite suitcase. It had the same shape. It was in leather. It was a hard shell suitcase. It was shiny brownish.
After Fhimah took the bag off the carousel, where did they go?
They walked together towards customs.
And what happened when they got to customs?
The suitcase was not opened for inspection.
And did they walk through then?
Yes.
Did you see any other people who were associated with them?
Outside McGrahi, he introduced me to some people. He told me they were from the technical department of the Libyan Secret Service.
Did you report this incident to your American representative?
Yes.
If they suggest that you didn't tell them, what would you say to that?
I don't think that they would be the ones telling the truth.
Going back again to 1986, it was soon after you went to Malta that the United States aircraft using British bases bombed Tripoli.
It was.
Sometime after that, did Saeed Rashid visit Lucca Airport?
Yes.
In the course of his visit, did there come a point where you were along with him on the tarmac near an aircraft?
Yes. He was on his way from departure to a Libyan aircraft, and there was a British plane about to take off. He turned and asked me about the possibility of placing an unaccompanied bag on board an English flight.
And did he say anything about what purpose?
Well, sending an unaccompanied bag. Well, if we interpret that thing intelligently, And I don't think we need an interpretation of that.
When you spoke to McGrahi about this matter, what was his reaction?
I remember that he said, "Don't rush things."
In April 1986, after a bomb attack on a discotheque in Berlin, the American government decided that it would retaliate against Libya. The first retaliation was a retaliation against surface-to-air missile sites, but that was followed up by an attack on the two main towns of Libya. In the attacks, some 70 people died, nearly all of them civilians, including the adopted daughter of Colonel Gaddafi. The problem for Britain was that Britain was used as a staging post for some of the bombers that were used in the attacks, and thus Libya had a profound grudge against both Britain, but particularly America.
The Crown had drawn from Giacca his incriminating recollections of Megrahi's and Fhimah's handling of what was apparently the suitcase bomb. However, in shaping their cross-examination, Taylor and Keane had access through the cables to all the background as to how these recollections had emerged.
Can I turn now to the conversation between yourself and Saeed Rashid beside a British aircraft, and to Mr. Megrahi's reaction when you reported him as saying, "Don't rush things"? Is his use of those words very clear in your mind?
What do you mean?
It's not a certainty in your mind that has just emerged, is it?
Could you repeat the question, please?
No, I will not repeat the question.
Mr. Taylor, will you repeat the question, please? It is his entitlement.
I am perfectly aware of that, my lord. Thank you. In relation to the words, "don't rush things," are they clear in your mind?
Clear.
Now, would you agree with me that you were seen by officers of the CIA on a very large number of occasions?
That's what I clarified yesterday.
You were interviewed on July the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, every day to the 1st of August 1991, weren't you? Yet, would you agree with me, Mr. Giacca, that never once did you mention any of those dozen or so interviews that Mr. Megrahi had used the words, "don't rush things"?
Well, I still remember the conversation.
Well, let's look at another conversation. In this one, you're trying to get $30,000 for a car rental business to keep you in Malta. And the Americans are saying, "Well, you've not given us much so far, so we don't know you're worth investing $30,000.
I don't remember that this happened.
See? Because it's significant, is it not? That immediately after that conversation, your handler records your view that you had personally seen a cache of 8 kilos of orange-coloured explosives in the Libyan Arab Airlines office. That's a sequence of events, isn't it? And it's deviously concocted by you to be uncheckable.
I don't think I was devious about it.
Well, it's a downright lie, Mr. Giacca.
It's not true.
Pretty improbable that anybody would keep explosives in a desk drawer.
No.
Well, isn't it improbable?
How do you want me to answer? What's your question?
Weren't you concerned about the security of the explosives? Inches from your leg when you sat at the desk and made notes and file reports.
So what?
Well, if that's your answer, then that's your answer. I want to pass on to another matter now, and that relates to the brown Samsonite suitcase. It is the case, as the Crown said earlier, isn't it, that there's no mention by you of a brown Samsonite suitcase in any of the sessions between you and the CIA throughout the entire period?
I've told many different people about this. So you can go back to the cables.
The simple truth is that there is a deafening silence about this matter in the cables. And I can assure you, Mr. Giacca, I'll be corrected if I'm wrong. The silence is deafening. You do not report something like this, Mr. Giacca. But you do report faithfully a trivial incident where Megrahi carried a case straight onto a connecting flight.
I have no interest in vamping up anything.
It comes along at least 2 years after the events concerned and under special circumstances, doesn't it? Because throughout your dealings with the CIA, they were pressurizing you to deliver some kind of information, weren't they?
I underwent no pressure from nobody.
You see, you weren't telling them anything they couldn't read for themselves in the newspapers.
No.
Now comes the interesting reflection by the CIA, because they say this does not rule out that Giaca was ideally positioned in December 1988 to witness individuals passing through Malta. If the bomb were indeed placed there, you could be used, according to this cable, because you were ideally positioned, and so now what happened was your flight from Malta. And this is when the Department of Justice personnel came into the picture. Isn't that right?
I met with representatives from that department.
So, moving on to the next cable, dated 13th of July 1991, and relating to a meeting the evening before, the day you left Malta for good, you went to a US warship. And you were then spirited from the warship to the United States. You must remember those discussions. You contacted the CIA, didn't you?
I said to you, and I made it clear, that I left Tripoli because I had been contacted by the CIA. When I reached Malta, I contacted them to say I had arrived. No more, no less than that.
Well, let's look at what the cable says. Giaca signaled his case officer for an emergency meeting for July 13. At the time, he did not sound good. There it is. It's plump and plain in the cable. Now, why do you continue to try to deceive this court?
I am not deceiving the court. I contacted them only to tell them that I had arrived in Malta. I am not lying to anyone.
You were not worried about your personal future.
I talked about the way they had contacted me. It was very dangerous when they contacted me in Libya, and I told them that I could not go back to Libya again.
You see, you go much further than that, Giaca, don't you? The cable goes on. During a rather emotional discussion, Giaca revealed that his wife is 4 months pregnant, and that, with the added responsibility of a family, he needed to know more about his security. Now, what could be clearer than that, Giaca?
I told them that contacting me in Libya was dangerous for my personal life. And I quite simply informed them that my wife was pregnant.
Reading on. Pegging the Department of Justice meeting as Giaca's only hope for his wife and baby, we were able to convince Giaca of the merits of the exit scheduled to begin later that afternoon. In other words, Giaca, the CIA said to you, your only hope is this meeting with the Department of Justice. Come up with something, and the future's rosy. Come up with nothing, and you are cut off without a penny. Tossed back to Malta.
First of all, I was not opposed to meeting with them.
Reading on. Giaca himself is a shattered person. Do you remember? July the 13th. Do you remember being a shattered person? Your life was in ruins, wasn't it, Giaca?
I don't remember.
You see, the documents build up the crescendo that I've described. It's not me who's doing it, it's the documents. And lo and behold, the deafening silence ends the very next day, when you come up with the brown Samsonite suitcase and this rubbish about customs. The very next day is the first mention by you, Giaca, of these matters. What do you have to say to that?
The representatives from the Department of Justice are very good investigators, and they can distinguish truth from lies. One way or another, they can obtain what they want.
As Richard Keane took over the cross-examination, the onslaught on the credibility of the Crown's major witness continued.
According to the cables, Mr. Giaca, you told the Americans that you were a relative of King Idris, the last king of Libya. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that. I am not related to King Idris.
You're not related to King Idris?
No.
When did you discover that you weren't related to him, Mr. Giaca?
I did not say that I was related to King Idris.
Mr. Jarker, you are a liar, aren't you?
I did not lie to anyone.
Mr. Jarker, you tell big lies and you tell small lies. But you lie, do you not?
I did not lie. That is my explanation.
But with respect, Mr. Jarker, that's not an explanation, is it?
Explanation for what?
An explanation for why the CIA would have recorded your claims to be a relative of King Idris, not only when you had your own translator, but when they had their own Arabist interviewing you.
I don't remember, and I didn't say.
You don't remember and you didn't say what, Mr. Jarker?
Yes.
Did you ever engage in black market currency trading, Mr. Jarker?
No, I did not do so.
Then can you explain to me why you told the American authorities in 1991 that you had been exchanging money in the black market in an effort to support yourself and your wife in Tripoli?
All Libyans who had their salaries from Tripoli exchanged their salaries with businessmen at a very small profit. And that was what I was doing.
Well, Mr. Jarker, while we're on the subject of money, have you made any plans on how you would intend to spend the $4 million reward offered by the US authorities if the accused in this case are convicted?
I haven't had any promises to receive any sum. And this is all rubbish. And I regret saying so. And you can ask the government yourself.
While you've been in America, Mr. Jarker, have you managed to dip into any of the gems of American literature, such as the short story writers like James Thurber?
I have had read some books, but not all authors.
Have you encountered someone called Mitty? First name Walter?
I do not recall.
No further questions, my lord.
And I felt when I heard all that really the evidence of this man should be discounted. He was clearly a self-seeking guy who'd gone down the road, as some people do, of living off betraying his country. And it was clear that he was given the utmost provocation to produce evidence that would progress this case.
When he came into court and actually started giving evidence, it was a massive disappointment. So there's this person you can't see speaking in a language you don't understand, and then you hear the interpreters saying what he has just said. And it seemed to us that some of the things that he had to say were just completely fantastical. Mr. Taylor took him apart. It was like a dissection. He was so exact in the way in which he set about destroying this person's credibility.
Having failed with Giaca, the Crown now tried a spoiling tactic by calling Abu Talb, an early suspect and one of those listed in the special defence. Talb's appearance was delayed because the defence was expecting information from the Syrian government, which they hoped would strengthen their case and throw light on the involvement of the Palestinians. Abu Talb was an Egyptian-born terrorist. He was serving a life sentence for his part in a series of bombings in Copenhagen in 1989. Talb had been an important figure in the PPSF, another Palestinian terrorist group. He was examined by Alistair Campbell.
So, from the time of your arrival back in Sweden at the end of October 1988 to the end of that year, Mr. Talb, did you leave Sweden at all?
No.
Did you in December 1988 remember having a problem with a car insurance or something of that sort?
Yes, I had a car and it had been stolen.
If on the 5th of December 1988, a person who gave the name Abu Talb attended a lawyer's office in Sweden, was that you?
Yes.
Were you also, during December 1988, receiving medical treatment?
Yes. Sorry, no, I don't know exactly, but I had a period of illness where I couldn't work.
Did your wife Jamila have a sister-in-law called Wafa Tosca, who had a baby in December 1988?
Yes, she had a baby at that time.
We know that she had a baby in the early hours of the 22nd of December 1988 in the hospital at Uppsala. Where were you at the time when Wafa Tosca had a baby?
I believe that I was with the youngsters at home. The women went to the hospital and I stayed at home to take care of the young children.
Talb's carefully prepared examination by the Crown lasted for just 1.5 hours. He had told the Crown what they wanted to hear, that he was in Sweden right up to the time of the bombing. The defence wanted much more from Talb. In his cross-examination, Richard Keane was determined to dent Talb's account of Swedish domesticity.
Now, Mr. Taub, in about 1969, you underwent your basic military training in the Egyptian army, didn't you?
That is correct.
And you were sent, first of all, on a commando training course in Armenia. That's correct too, isn't it?
That is untrue. I didn't go to Armenia. I've never been to Armenia.
Well, with respect, Mr. Taub, on a previous occasion you were actually asked about this matter, and you said, after referring to joining the Egyptian army, in Armenia I went for a 6-month course to be a commando. Now, did you tell the Swedish police the truth when you were interviewed by them on this occasion, Mr. Taub, or were you lying to them?
That is untrue, and I didn't say that to the Swedish police.
So the Swedish police are lying when they write that down in their statement? Is that what you're saying, Mr. Taub?
You can ask them yourself. I know I didn't say that.
So I'm not asking them, Mr. Taub, I'm asking you. So these Swedish policemen had sat down and invented the idea that you went on to Armenia for a 6-month course to be a commando. Is that what you're suggesting, Mr. Taub? Answer the question, Mr. Taub.
Maybe. I don't know exactly, but I didn't say that.
After that course, Mr. Taub, you were sent to the Soviet Union for instruction in the use of surface-to-air missiles, weren't you?
I told you at the time I was in the Soviet Union. This is true.
I ask you if you were sent there for instruction in the use of surface-to-air missiles. Answer the question, Mr. Taub.
I don't want to enter into these details.
I don't care whether you want to enter into these details or not, Mr. Taub. Answer the question.
I answered the question. I said that I was on a military mission to the Soviet Union, and I think that's sufficient.
You may think it's sufficient, Mr. Taub. I don't. Answer the question. Were you sent there
I
for
don't
instruction?
care. I don't.
Just let me finish.
I don't care if it's sufficient to you or not. What concerns me, what's important to me, is I am not lying.
Mr. Taub, you've already lied to this court, and I will illustrate that very clearly. For the moment, I just want you to answer the question. Were you sent to the Soviet Union for instruction in the use of surface-to-air missiles? Answer the question, please.
I will not answer this question, and this is my right.
It is not your right, Mr. Taub. I want you to answer the question, and if you won't do so, I will invite the court to direct you to do so. Now, answer the question. Very well. My lord, I invite you to direct this witness to answer the question.
Mr. Keene, you will have to persuade us that the answer to this question is relevant to the present inquiry.
I am perfectly content to do that. Could the witness be withdrawn?
Very well. Would the witness please leave the court? Yes, Mr. Keene.
My lord, I proceed upon the premise that this man operated as a professional terrorist. And then in 1983, he removed to Sweden, where he would have the court believe that he effectively retired and from time to time accompanied his brother-in-law to a cafe where he helped out. In fact, in asking the question about surface-to-air missiles, I am not suggesting that he used one on this occasion, but his refusal to disclose the true extent of his training is relevant to his credibility before this court. And the true extent of his training is relevant to his ability to wage terrorist activities, whether in the Middle East or Europe. In my submission, I am perfectly entitled to ask this question.
But what is the status of this witness in this court? Up until now, all the witnesses from outside Scotland have been voluntary witnesses.
Your Lordship, as at the beginning of October this year, the Swedish Parliament brought into being a law in terms of which this man was obliged to come here and give evidence. He has no alternative.
It's a question of the sanctions, Mr. Keene. We're all aware of what the sanction would be for any domestic witness refusing to answer a question, but is that sanction available to us?
I believe it is, my lord.
As a result of these exchanges, Taub was given a warning, and his tone became more compliant. Keene set out to link him with the purchase of the clothes from Tony Gauci, and also to expose his networking amongst his contacts in the weeks leading up to the Pan Am 103 bombing. But first the purchase of the clothes. And crucial to this was whether Taub was in Malta in November of 1988. Evidence on the weather had shown that there was only a 10% probability of rain on the one day in early December when McGrahi was in Malta. So could Taub have bought them? Could he be proved to be in Malta in late November?
Did you, in fact, return to Malta after the 26th of October 1988, Mr. Taub?
No, I didn't return to Malta after that date.
Then can you explain why Mr. Gouchy would identify you as the person who came into his shop on about the 23rd of November 1988 and bought certain clothes, remnants of which were identified as being in a bomb suitcase on Pan Am 103?
If I remember correctly, my lawyer told me that this was incorrect and that the man in Malta did not identify you.
Were you in Malta on about the 23rd of November 1988, Mr. Taub?
The 23rd November? Again, I travelled back on the 26th, so of course I was in Malta.
So on the 23rd of November 1988, a month after the October date you mentioned a moment ago, Mr. Taub, you were in Malta?
No, I was not in Malta on the 23rd of November.
Well, can I remind you of a statement which was taken from you by the Swedish police in 1989? They are talking about a plane ticket found in your possession, and they say, according to Abu Taub, this is the trip he made, from Malta to Stockholm on November the 26th, 1988. Now, did you make such a trip at the end of November, Mr. Taub?
This is not correct.
I see. But we know about a telephone call on the 11th of December 1988 from one Abdul Salem in Malta to your number in Sweden, don't we?
Perhaps.
Did you, in fact, respond to Salem's telephone call by sending him a radio cassette recorder?
This is not correct.
A radio cassette which had been retrieved from the PFLP in Germany.
This is untrue.
Are you aware that on the 13th of December 1988, 2 days after you received your telephone call from Salem, another associate of yours, Magdi Musa, left Denmark for Malta and contrived to remain there until the 22nd of December, the day after the bombing?
I did not participate in this.
Are you aware that another associate, Talal Shaban, made a similar trip from Denmark to the same hotel in Malta and remained there until after the 21st of December, Mr. Taub?
I don't know anybody by the name of Talal Shaban.
You sure about that, Mr. Taub?
Yes.
What happened to the radio cassette bomb which the US government reported that you had admitted to retrieving from West Germany?
My lords!
This is untrue.
Don't answer the question. My lords, if this question is to be put, it should be put more precisely. There is no witness, no evidence to back it. It's something that is simply being plucked out of the air.
It's actually been plucked from a published document, my lord. But, as it's not in the evidence, I won't persist in the question. Mr. Taub, do you consider that the destruction of Pan Am 103 by a bomb would have been a criminal act?
Yes.
Very well. No further questions, my lords.
Abu Taub was the one witness who I felt cast a spell over that court. I don't mean a spell in the sense of got the court to do what he wanted. I mean a spell of chill over the court. There was a feeling of evil about Abu Taub. I felt that he gave off the certainty that although he claimed he'd not been active and so on and so forth, I felt that he seemed like a guy who would be quite content to kill for a ideology to which he was belonging.
But now the Crown closed its case. Immediately Richard Keane, on behalf of Amin Khalifa Fhimah, made a submission of no case to answer. His move reflected very much on the Crown's failure to produce anything but circumstantial evidence for the involvement of the accused, but particularly of Fhimah. If Keane's submission was to succeed, it would undermine their whole case. The argument centred around Fhimah's role in placing the suitcase bomb on the plane at Lucca Airport on the 21st of December.
There is no evidence whatsoever that Amin Khalifa Fhimah, the second accused, was at Lucca Airport on that date. This time the matter goes a little further than that because the Crown took evidence from Isabel Attard, who was a check-in agent for Air Malta at the airport on the 21st of December 1988. And it was she who had been responsible for checking in the first accused. Having clearly ascertained that this witness knew the second accused, that she knew him well, at no time did the Crown attempt in any way to pursue the suggestion that the second accused did or could have accompanied the first accused. So even where the opportunity arose to explore the suggestion that the second accused was at the airport on the 21st of December 1988, it was not taken. And so there is no evidence in the case that the second accused was there on that day.
Throughout Keane's submission, their lordships had been silent. However, when Alistair Campbell began his response, there was an animated exchange over the evidence for the Malta connection.
My lords, what I am endeavouring to do is to identify possible routes into the system. I'm not suggesting that the bag was introduced in under a normal procedure. I'm suggesting that Mr. Fhimah was in effect an insider accomplice. He must have taken advantage of his being known at the airport to act as an insider accomplice to introduce a bag into the system rather than formally check it in.
It is accepted, though, that there is no evidence that he was seen at the airport on the 21st of December.
I accept that. It's a matter of inference, and my submission is that in all that chaos, Mr. Fhimah, with an additional tagged bag, would not attract attention. And the check-ins were not the only point at which a bag could easily be ingested. Both they and the customs could be circumvented.
Yes. But if you were going to put a suitcase containing what by that time would be a ticking bomb into the system, you would want to make absolutely sure that it was going to go, wouldn't you?
Well, that, of course, confirms the need for somebody with access beyond the public area.
But since we don't know how the suitcase was put on the plane, how do we know that it was Mr. Fhimah rather than somebody else, like a loader who had been bribed, who actually subverted it?
I take that from the evidence of this whole chapter of days that Mr. Fhimah has been recruited by Mr. McGrahi, his friend, to assist him.
You are tending to assume that Mr. Fhimah is involved, when that is the very thing which has to be inferred from the evidence, that he was involved knowingly.
What I am endeavouring to do is to outline the facts as to what he did along with Mr. McGrahi, and from these facts, taken as a whole, my submission is, the inference is that he assisted with this bag, and must have known what the purpose of the exercise was. I therefore invite your lordships to reject the submission made.
Thank you, Mr. Depute. Mr. Keene, is there anything you wish to add?
My lord, I wonder if I might respond to some of the points. Firstly, he was required to obtain an airline tag to send a bag from Malta to New York via Frankfurt and Heathrow. Well, the Air Malta interline tag required for that route was available in Tripoli, where Libya Arab Airlines were the handlers for Air Malta. The second matter he could bring to the conspiracy was the ability to bring an improvised explosive device into Malta without attention. But we are not told how. And the third matter he could bring was the introduction of the bag into the baggage system. But in effect, we are not told how that could be done either. So what your lordships are being asked to do at this stage, as I understand, is to infer that a man who wasn't there did, by means that we do not know, smuggle a bomb onto a plane at Lucca Airport.
The judges refused Keene's motion, on the grounds that Giacca's evidence and Fhimah's diary raised questions which needed answers. But the defence did persuade their lordships that they could begin their case after the Christmas recess. This would give time for the long-awaited reply to come from the Syrian government. On January the 8th, the court reconvened.
Your lordship indicated at the time of our adjournment in December that it would only be in the most exceptional circumstances that any further adjournment will be contemplated for the purpose of recovering the Syrian document. Thus, given the statement by the Crown to the court this morning that the chances of ever receiving a document from Syria are remote, I am anticipating an immediate ruling by your lordships that the defence case should continue.
In these circumstances, Mr. Taylor, I think you've reasonably anticipated what our reaction is, which is, namely, that you should proceed with your case.
I'm obliged for that indication. My lords, in that event, in relation to further evidence, I propose to call no further evidence.
Mr. Keene?
My lords, I can advise the court that it is not my intention either to call further evidence on behalf of the second accused.
My main feeling was of disappointment, intense disappointment. I felt robbed in a way that this trial, we'd fought for this trial for 8 years, and we've got it, and we're going to be robbed of what possibly might have been the most enlightening part of the whole trial.
With the absence of defence witnesses, the Crown felt their case strong enough to go for the murder charge alone. So Alistair Campbell began his final submission, carefully marshalling the mass of circumstantial evidence which made up the Crown case. But his summary showed that Campbell was aware that his Achilles heel was the Malta connection and the strength of his star witness.
Now, If your lordships accept the evidence of Mr. Giacca as to the bringing in of the suitcase on the 20th of December, then that is significant further evidence. In addition, they may accept my submission that it can be inferred that on the morning of the 20th of December, Mr. Fhimah did more than just assist Mr. McGrahi at check-in and immigration control, that he also provided his expertise in order to allow the introduction of the bag. Then that makes for even further evidence of their acting in concert.
When Taylor's time came, he used prosecution evidence to build a defence case during his 3-day submission. He offered a highly detailed critique not only of the Malta link in placing the suitcase bomb in the system, but also of the weak links in Frankfurt and London. And he criticised Gauchi's identification of McGrahi and poured scorn on the evidence of both Bollier and Giacca.
As will be obvious to the court, the defence cannot prove who was responsible for the bombing of Pan Am 103. And there is, of course, in our law no requirement on the defence so to do. The special defence of incrimination simply gave notice of our intention to elicit evidence which may be of some relevance to the court in reaching its verdict. It is against that background that the activities of some of the persons and the groups referred to in that notice should be considered. Thus, in October of 1988, there was in Germany a PFLP cell who had both the intention and the means to destroy civil aircraft. That cell was interested in American flights. That cell had acquired a Pan Am timetable. The differences, and there are differences, between the Pan Am 103 device and the devices manufactured by the PFLP cell are not decisive ones. Further, there was an alternative to Libya as a source of supply of MST-13 timers, namely the Stasi. There are also circumstances which may link Abu Talb to the events we are considering, notably in Malta.
Keen's defence of his client Fhimah had already been rehearsed when he argued the no case to answer. Now he ended as he had done so often during the trial, with a flourish.
It has not been established by coherent, reliable or compelling evidence that Fhimah was party to any plot to destroy a civil aircraft and murder its occupants. The Crown's case requires too many leaps of faith on the part of your lordships. We have inference upon inference upon inference, leading to an inference.
During the 9-month trial, the judges had listened to 230 witnesses, resulting in 10,000 pages of evidence. It took them just 10 days to reach their verdict.
In relation to the first accused, there are 3 important witnesses: Abdelbaset Giacca, Edwin Bollier, and Tony Gauchi. Putting the matter shortly, we are unable to accept Abdelbaset Giacca as a credible and reliable witness on any matter, except his description of the organization of the Libyan Secret Service and the personnel involved there. We have assessed carefully the evidence of the 3 witnesses about the activities of Mibo relating to the MST-13 timers which the company made. All 3, and notably Mr. Bollier, were shown to be unreliable witnesses, continually contradicting earlier statements that they had made. In particular, we reject Mr. Bollier's evidence that outside his Zurich office he met a mysterious stranger who he thought was a member of the security services. This account given by Mr. Bollier belongs, in our view, to the role of fiction, where it may best be placed in the genre of the spy thriller. We do, however, accept certain parts of Mr. Bollier's evidence, despite finding him at times untruthful. As to Mr. Gauchi, the clear impression that we form was that he was entirely credible, particularly in the list of clothing that he sold, and the fact that the purchaser was a Libyan. On the matter of identification of the first accused, there are undoubtedly problems. We are nevertheless satisfied that his identification, so far as it went, of the first accused was reliable and should be treated as a highly important element in this case. The absence of an explanation as to how the suitcase was taken into the system at Lucca Airport is a major difficulty for the Crown case. But after taking full account of that difficulty, we remain of the view that the primary suitcase began its journey at Lucca Airport. The clear inference which we draw from this evidence is that the conception, planning and execution of the plot was of Libyan origin. As to the second accused, while there may well be a sinister inference to be drawn from the diary entries, we've come to the conclusion that there is insufficient other acceptable evidence to support or confirm such an inference. In these circumstances, the second accused falls to be acquitted. There is nothing in the evidence which leaves us with any reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the first accused, and accordingly we find him guilty of the remaining charge in the indictment as amended. The verdicts returned were by a unanimous decision. Abdelbaset Ali Mohammed al-Megrahi. The mandatory sentence for the crime of murder is imprisonment for life, and that is the sentence we impose. We shall be recommending that a period of 20 years should elapse before you're considered for release. You will be recommended for deportation at the end of the sentence. That is all.
Lockerbie on Trial was presented by Sheena MacDonald. For the court, Lord Sutherland was played by Hugh Ross, Lord Maclean by Jack Claff, and Lord Coulsfield and the Clerk of the Court by Denis Hawthorn. For the prosecution, Alistair Campbell QC was played by Hugh Fraser, and Alan Turnbull QC by David Ashton. For the defence, Richard Keane QC was played by Sean Scott, and William Taylor QC by Ian Hogg. The witnesses were Detective Inspector Maclean and Nicholas Charlo, played by David Bannerman. Tony Gauci and Chief Inspector Williamson by John Ianu, Wilfred Borg by Raud Rowri, Edwin Bollier by Christopher Rodiesjski, Isabel Attard by Tatanya Colombo, Giaca by George Sebedes, and Abu Talb by Jack Claff. Des Mcalear played Air Traffic Control. The BBC would like to thank Pam Dix, the Reverend John Mosey, Dr. Jim Swire and George Joffe for their participation in the programme. The transcripts are Crown copyright and are reproduced with the permission of the Queen's Printer for Scotland. Lockerbie on Trial was adapted from the court transcripts by Peter Goodchild and produced in Bristol by Jeremy Howe and Margaret Wren.